Hey, that fine church. I'm sitting down for announcements today because we have so little. So I'm going to fill it with this filler time right. No, here's announcements. This Wednesday night, we will not be having service of any kind or any form. So you have a free night to stay home. But we will be coming back together first week of January with our open heavens, with prayer and worship. I can't wait for that night already. Finally, hey, kids youth camp, our winter camp is this Friday, Saturday. You get your kids signed up with the youth pastors. Be ready to connect with them. I'm believing those kids are going to get changed. They're going to have a great time. And we can't wait to hear from them until Sunday morning. Take care. Enjoy your time off. Love you all. Bye.
Hello. I think it'd be easier if I was talking to you guys like this. All right. Good morning. As you can see, Justin is up here, not Simon. I enjoy the opportunity to share what God has shared with me, and over the light of the last few months and the things that I and my family have gone through. Some of this was pretty profound, but before I get started, I wanted to ask my wife to come up and share a little testimony that she has for you guys.
Hi, I'm his wife. I'm Yvonne. Can you all hear me? All right. So I want to share a personal mini testimony about the flesh and my spirit. When my husband was in the hospital, it was on day 2, and I am the kind of person that when an emergency is going on, I'm in survival mode so that the people around me can rely on me and pull strength off of me. And since coming to Christ, it's really worked well because I pull my strength off of Christ. With that being said, I am also human and I fight with my flesh often. And so I want to be very transparent with you today. On day 2, I'm coming up the elevator, and Justin calls me and says the doctor's in the room, and I said, well, I'm coming up in the elevator. I'll be there in less than 5 minutes. Don't let him leave. I get to the room, and the doctor's gone. Neither Justin nor the nurse can give me information. My dear friend Amanda calls me to check on me, and she said, how are you feeling? And I said, honestly, I don't know if I should be frustrated or blessed right now. My flesh and my spirit were literally fighting. Nothing was making sense. Justin was broken. He was broken. All the information I had before me, the reality, the things that I could see, touch, did not make sense, and I had a decision to make. Was I going to choose to be frustrated or blessed? And mentally, I hit my knees, and I chose to be blessed. Psalms 46:10, be still and know that I am God. 2 Corinthians 5:7, for we walk by faith, not by sight. Because I know that true peace comes from knowing that God is in control, not me. Faith is unseen but felt. Faith is strength when we feel we have none. Faith is hope when all seems lost. I sat in that hospital room for 5 hours because I did not want to miss the doctor again. And in that 5 hours, I prayed with faith, and I stood and felt blessed when the doctor returned. He said Justin did not need surgery because his ribs realigned, and he was only fractured, not broken. He did not need surgery. So God had already miraculously healed Justin. God already did his part, and Justin did not need surgery. So I'm glad that I stood on faith and chose blessed instead of frustrated. So in 2 Corinthians 4:18, so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal.
So I remember very little of the first few days in the hospital, right? It was just flashes of things and all that. And a few days after I got home, my wife shared this little bit of testimony with me. And, after hearing that, I was kind of thinking about it, and just something stirred in me, something profound that she had said really, really stood out to me. It was very profound to me. And what it was this. In that testimony, you heard my wife going through a battle, right? It was a battle of her flesh and worldly things, and a battle of faith and walking with Christ, right? So, really, on the first side is the reason, the logic, and that's hence the title, Faith versus Reason. Is that a battle? Or should it be a battle, as we are followers of Christ, and, we want to walk the way that Jesus walked and the way that God calls us to walk. Is there really a conflict between that? So on the one side of the battle, in her mind at that time, nothing really was making sense according to her flesh, using human logic and human reasoning, right? And you heard that. She's just like, man, everything I can touch, feel, and see, nothing was making sense because God was in the moment, healing, doing, providing, right? So using her human logic and her reason, right? All of us use that, right? Absolutely nothing was making sense. So I wanted to define what Oxford says what reason and logic are, just so we have an understanding of what it really is, right? And reason is the power of the mind to think, understand, and form judgments by a process of logic. Logic is a reasoning conducted or assessed according to strict principles of validity. Now, for me, validity means that stuff that you can detect, see, touch, hear, taste, whatever, senses, right? All senses. So, according to that, she was in that battle. Hello. Things weren't making sense, It was just something that was just crazy. And so, in that time, I remember, man, those were crazy days, because I remember waking up or coming to in the hospital. Actually, I remember a flash of something, and I could remember her sitting there, and boy, could I see the irritation, the anger, the frustration, that was the turmoil inside of her. I could see it in her face, in her countenance, in her eyes. And it's not often that I could really, I'll be completely transparent, that I could really read that in my wife, right? Because sometimes either she's hiding it real well, and she's trying to be, a good wife, or sometimes I'm just not perceptive, and let's be honest, that's probably the truth of it, right? I'm just not being perceptive. I am human, right? But I could see that in her, and I could see that it was really bothering her. And I'll be honest at this as well. I was on some pretty good drugs in there, so I wasn't really sure what I was really seeing at the time. Now that I processed it a little later, I know what that was. And I can even remember another time, and this isn't part of her testimony, but I remember coming to again at one point, and the night nurse, Jason, his name was Jason. If you're watching, Jason, thanks, man. But Jason was in there, and I remember coming to, maybe I was sleeping, I don't know, but I remember coming to, and my wife was like, can you guys even take care of him? You know what I mean? Like, what's going on here, And Jason, long story short, Jason was like, well, can you go anywhere else? And she didn't answer, and that's when I really started coming to, and he's like, so do you want to go somewhere else? And I'm like, heck no, I ain't moving anywhere. You got to be kidding me. Like she said, I was broken. I was too broken. I wasn't going anywhere, man. There was I didn't want to, they had transferred me beds at that point from the ICU, or from emergency department to the ICU, and that's where I was at. And I was hurting pretty bad. There was no way. There was no way that I was going to be moving. That was tough. I won't get into the injuries because that's just moot. Okay, so on the other side of the battle was her spirit, right? And her drawing her strength from Christ, right? And her faith, right? And so those two things are profound, right? And I got to say that how often do I find myself in that battle, right? And if we're all honest with ourselves, how often do we really come into that battle, you know, where our mind, our flesh is fighting against our faith and our spirit, and where the Holy Spirit is leading us? And for me, it happens somewhat often. You know, Simon had mentioned that 30 seconds down the road, we got to ask for forgiveness from Jesus because of what's going through our mind, right? But at the same time, you know, that's that fight, right? For me especially, I'm a road rager. I get mad if you don't use your blinker. I get mad at drive right, even though I'm the worst driver probably out there also, right? So how hypocritical is that? But that's my flesh battling my spirit, you know, because in that time I have gotten to the point where I'm like, oh, Lord, you got to please forgive me because that was not a very nice thought. You know, I'm no longer throwing sign language or obscenities out my window, right? I immediately realize where I'm falling short from his teaching to me and giving that forgiveness and asking that forgiveness, you know. So it's a work in progress on me. But so her faith and her, we need to be on the faith slide. Third one, please. There we go. I was wondering why you were looking at me like that. But anyways, on the other side of that battle was the Spirit and God, her strength from Jesus. And she said for 5 hours that this battle was going on while we were in the hospital. She's in there in the hospital. I don't remember much of that, but I do remember, like I said, waking up and just being like, wow. I could see the frustration and anger in that, you know. And then she said in her testimony that mentally she had fallen to her knees and in faith chose to be blessed in that moment, right? Blessed that God was working through all that and not letting her flesh or her human reasoning or her human logic take over, but living in the moment of God and Christ are working in that time, healing me and fixing all these things that were utterly really wrong. I should have spent more than 4 or 5 days in the hospital, and in 4 or 5 days they were releasing me, and that was all God, right? Hallelujah. Amen. So in that, we saw that faith had won that battle, right? She chose, on KSBJ they have this saying that is, choose joy, right? And it's the joy pledge or whatever. Well, she chose joy. She chose to live in that blessing and not in that frustration and anger, which is a real choice, right? Because often I do choose to live in anger. Like I said, that's a work that God is doing in me. But anyway, so that led me to this question of the title of this sermon, which is faith versus reason, because I was just like, man, is there really biblically a conflict between faith and reason, that, you know, the reason that we're supposed to use? And so this is kind of what I found. There's a big misconception. Some people as Christians have the idea that faith and reason are separated by a big, huge canyon, right? You can't build a bridge across. It's just too big. You know what I mean? And that just is not something that we can overcome. You know what I mean? You either have reason, human reason, or you have faith, and that's the way you live. It's an extreme, right? One or the other. And that comes from our misunderstanding of what biblical faith and biblical reason really mean. And I'm about to break it down for you. So, in Hebrews 11:1, Paul tells us that faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So we hope in our faith, right? And we can't see it. And I had to, well, part of that whole studying and everything on this subject, once God led me to, like I've said a million times, Google is my best friend. I Google a lot, and then I read a bunch of the Bible, led to verses, all those. Anyways, hope for. There's a Greek word for that, and I don't know if I could say this right, and I'm about to sound like Simon up here, but I think it's elpidagia. I'm probably hacking that, and if you're Greek, I'm sorry. But anyways, what that is that word indicates a confident expectation and the kind of confidence we have when we have a good reason to believe something, right? I'm not going to try to say that word again, but that's what that word is in Greek in the Bible, and that's what it means. So a confident reason to believe. I really believe that my wife had a confident reason to believe that God was doing something in that hospital room, and chose to stand on that and not the anger and confusion and frustration. So I got an example of this. So when we believe that God will keep his promise, this constitutes faith because we can't see it, touch it, hear it, or any of that. But we stand in that confidence because God has demonstrated to us that he keeps our promises, right? And there's several times in my life where God has definitely kept his promise. And it's really crazy to me about how he goes about all that. But in this situation, every step of that first 5 days, I think, that after that accident, God just boom, 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 boom. And to me, there's no denying it. And that's really how God gets me. It's very, very, he just lights it up in my life, right? He just highlights it to me. It's very, I can't think of the word I'm saying, but it's dramatic, you know? Like, there's no question in my mind when he does these things, and there's no room for doubt or anything, and this is what he does, you know what I mean? And this is who he is. He loves me. There's no doubt in my mind that he loves me, and he shows me in those ways, you know what I'm saying? So biblical faith, standing on that confidence that we have that he keeps his promises, because we have the evidence of that without using our senses, is awesome. Now, biblical reasoning. God calls us to reason in Isaiah 1:18. He tells us that, "Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall become like wool." So God is saying, let's reason about this, because at that time, Isaiah the prophet, I don't remember where he was at, but he was, I can't remember where he was at, unfortunately. But he was trying to, all these idols and everything were being around him, and he was trying to reason with these people to let them know that, hey, this is not right. And God had called him to do that, right? But anyway, so reason is, we see right here that God calls us to reason, and reason is an important part of Christianity. It's a tool that God has given us to use, not use, right? And the way we choose to use that is up to us. It's not necessarily, God just doesn't give us a choice, right? He gives us the freedom of choice to us, right? We could choose to follow him, well, same thing. We could choose to use the tools that he has given us in the way that he has described them to us, or we could choose to misuse them and not do it that way, right? Which for me usually gets me in trouble. And so, I mean, that's the honest truth, right? So it allows us to draw conclusions and inferences from other information such as the information he has given us in his word, like in Isaiah 1:18. Also, God shows us in his word through Paul in Acts 17:17 that it says that, so he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Now, this Paul was in, help me out here, where was he at that time? He was in Athens or something like that, I believe. But anyways, he was in the Greek territory where most of those people were philosophers, right? And the things that they did was they would sit down and listen to the newest, coolest ideas of the time, right? And boy, they would really want to hear about that, discuss it, debate it, and all those things. Well, here we also see that God calls us to reason in the principles of his word, because he had sent Paul into the synagogue, I believe, for 3 days at that time to reason with these guys. And there was fruit from that, because many of the philosophers had turned, and it says, not even to mention the women that also had heard and listened and sat through that had brought themselves to Christ. And so it was not futile, right? God didn't call Paul to go in there and do that. It was totally because God wanted Paul to go in there to reason with these people, to bring them to the Lord, right? So God always wants us to use our mind. He has given us, but he wants us to use our minds properly in a way that is honoring him, not in a way that is honoring us, not in a way that is honoring our flesh, but honoring him. I can remember where God actually had, that's not a good story. I have lots of bad stories. But I also have lots of good stories where the Lord really impacted my life. And here's a perfect one. So, and I probably shared this a couple of times before. But when I first got back out of jail and came to the Lord, you know, I had somebody in jail. I was going to church to get out of myself. I wasn't going for the right reasons, but God had sent these two guys in there to reason with us, knucklehead inmates, right? And try to help us see the light of the Lord. And I wasn't there for that. I was there because I was completely sick and tired of everybody in my unit, monotony of everyday things, and being told what to do, when to do. And I just remember that guy said that I told him that I was getting out. They asked if there was any prayer requests. I told him, hey, I'm getting out soon, and I really need to know what to do. And at the end of that service, before we went back to the unit, he was like, hey, have you tried asking God? And I laughed at him, right? Because at that time in my life, God wasn't, to me, present, right? I didn't know who he was. I didn't feel him. You know what I mean? None of that. And well, moving forward to when I moved to Vancouver, and I started hanging out with Simon and my kids and got sober, and that whole story is another one that I won't get into. But God had moved me there to get away from my old life, get away from my old self. And he had used Simon and my wife and my children as the reason to do this, right? But at that time also, he had reason for the mission that he had for my life, right? My purpose, right? According to his will. And that was to ultimately come here and plant a church with Simon the cop and Justin the criminal and Sam and Wannalee, and you know. But do you see the craziness in the reason of all that, you know, and to start out where I started out at, and the whole process, God had great reason in that, because I wouldn't be sitting up here talking to you guys on a stage and having the trust of Simon or the Lord to give any kind of message, because I wasn't being obedient. And so, you know, that's really a big, huge glimpse of why and how God's reason and my faith and my choosing and my obedience really brought me to where I'm at and why I'm here. So throughout all that, we saw how reason is really defined in the Bible, right? I just gave a couple instances. You could do some more research and all that. But God calls us to reason, but he calls us to reason through his word, with what the knowledge and wisdom that he gives us through the Bible, not in our flesh, not in our stubbornness, not in our, not in our flesh. I'm losing words today. But so we see that faith is actually necessary. Well, the next one is faith is necessary for reason. And in Proverbs 1:7, the word says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So biblical faith and biblical reasoning do actually work together because God gives us reasons. We give reasons also. That's another part. But God gives us reasons to have lived by faith. Hello. And so faith is basically a prerequisite for reason. And in order to reason about anything, we must have faith that there are laws of logic which correctly prescribe the correct chain of reasoning. A Christian, or we, would expect to find a standard of reasoning that reflects the thinking of the biblical God. That's why laws of logic are that's why laws of logic, which stem from the Christian faith, we have a very good reason for our faith. And this is exactly what my wife did in that moment, is she let go of her fleshly reason and stood on her faith. And through faith, with the word, we can reason within the design of it that God designed for us, with reasoning based upon what he has said in his word. And so the time that we were sitting at the hospital, boy, I'm really lost for words today. I'm sorry, guys. But the time that we were at the hospital, the atmosphere changed, not only in my room, but in her demeanor and everything changed, and stuff started to improve. The nurses started to, listen or whatever, and hear. And one I got to share this with you. Where's Donnie at? Donnie came to see me probably in a much worse state than Ray Ray has ever seen me in. And Ray Ray works with me almost every day. And anyways, Donnie came to see me, and I was in a not good place. I don't even know if I was coherent enough to really make sense. But it was awesome to see a familiar face and talk with him. And that was right after this situation. And I started to become more coherent in that time. But then they moved me again after you saw me, because I believe I was in ICU at that time. They had moved me the next night, or that late night, and moved me to a regular room. And so the first nurse that came in for that shift was this nurse named Jennifer, and I don't remember her last name, but I know that she was a godsend, and God had reason for her to be there. And it was this. This woman was a believer. This woman was an advocate for me. And this woman had no problem explaining not only what she was doing, but what I should be doing to help myself in that situation, right? Because I will tell you that I've only been in the hospital twice for a prolonged period of time, more than a couple hours or whatever. That was 5 days, and that was when I burnt my leg. And they never explained anything to me. They just told me, this is what's going down, this is how it's going to happen, and that's it, right? And I get it, because that's their job. That's what they're supposed to do. The doctors are telling them you need to do this, you know what I mean, and all that stuff. But this woman came in, and she was my advocate, man. Like, God sent her as my advocate because she was like, look, you're in pain. And this is just one instance. She's like, I'm going to tell you right now that when we come in here and ask you about where you're at on the pain scale, right, 10 being excruciating, 1 like, meh, you know what I'm saying? She goes, you need to be honest, because every time that we've come in here, you said you're at a 4 to 5, but yet you won't get out of bed or move. And I could tell that you're in excruciating pain. And she was like, the way it works is this. If you're really hurting and you got to move, you got to let them know that, hey, I'm at a 7 or 8, and come in and medicate you and give you the correct dose of medicine so that you can actually function. That's why you're here, is to heal and learn how to deal with this, because you're in a state of brokenness, and you got to learn how to function and move around and all that, and that's how it works. I won't lie when I say that I was I still am an addict, right? And so I'm always scared that I live in somewhat of fear, which I know that the good Lord says don't live in that fear. But I live in that fear of I could just relapse into something else, right? Because my drug of choice at the time was meth or weed, marijuana, and it could easily be changed to something else and be substituted, right? And so I was always living in fear of that. She was like, well, as long as you're not abusing it, you're going to be all right. But anyway, so that really was God's reason for sending that nurse into my room and taking care of me. She did an awesome job. And Jennifer, I'll never forget that lady. She did great. But there was reason for that, because she also was like, oh, you're a believer, you know, and we could have conversations that were not offensive or anything. I didn't have to worry. You know, I could be me, my wife could be her, and my kids, when they came, I'll tell you this too, at one point in time, we had the whole room filled with people, and she walked in and she was like, whoa, is this how you do family reunions? Someone gets brutally hurt and you got to gather in the hospital? Yeah. So she did. Yeah, that's right. So she did. She was like, all right, does everybody want an ice cream? And they were all, yeah. So she went and got 12 or so ice creams and brought them back. What a blessing, right? That was awesome, especially to ease that thing, because I was looking pretty horrible, pretty bad, swollen, black eye, yeah, beat up. Yeah, but there was a reason for every step of that whole situation that I was in the hospital, right? And it was God's reason. It wasn't by any fleshly anything. I mean, yeah, maybe fleshly, the nurses and the people involved had their job there, but other than that, you know, God really had reason for all that stuff. And it just was cool to see how all of that, with our faith, really brought that whole situation to a conclusion, right? I mean, I won't lie, I'm still in a little bit of pain, but other than that, it was great. All right, so that leads me to today's challenge, and that is this week's challenge. Pray that God will show you where you fall short using his reason and faith. Like I said in the car, you know, I will choose to be fleshly using reason why I am thinking these negative thoughts and maybe shouting in my car, but not at them, right? But that's one thing in one place where I got to stand on his reason and stand in faith that I can do this. But yes, that's the challenge. Pray and see where God is. Pray for where you are falling short and ask God to show you that and how to fix that. All right. Are we doing communion now? No? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. See, I'm lost today. I'm a little nervous. Look, my mom is here today. Yeah, I haven't seen her in 3.5 years. And so that's tough. And then when I'm usually up here and Simon's sitting right here, I should just put this invisible or imaginary screen on, because I feel his eyes piercing me as I'm up here giving a sermon. But that's just me, right? But anyways, So you heard in that message or in that testimony also, I really should have died in that accident. That accident was horrible. The car flipped six times, end over end. And a couple days after I got out of the hospital, I got a phone call from someone that had actually pulled over on the accident, right? Because at first, the EMTs were telling me that I was the one who cut myself out of the car, okay? And I was thinking to myself, that's crazy. Or I have some serious mad skills in survival techniques, right? Because, oh my goodness. But no, God had this, and this is a guy who rode a motorcycle. God had this man on a motorcycle behind me for a reason. He pulled over. He said when he and another car pulled over, he said when they got out of the car and they were standing there, and I think they were calling 911. I'm not really precise on how all that went down, but they said, this dude's dead. You know what I mean? My arm was hanging out the window. Things were lifeless. Everything was still. And they were just standing up there, and they said to each other, I think this guy's dead. Then he looked down, and my arm starts moving right out the window. And he was like, him and the other guy looked at each other, oh my gosh, he's alive. So they ran down there, and this guy didn't fail to tell me that I'm a big dude, okay? He told me, man, you're a big dude, but it took me about 2 minutes, but I got in there and I cut you out of that car and pulled you out of that car and drug you up to the highway to wait for the ambulance. I don't believe that he saved my life, but I believe that the reason that he was there was because of God. I believe that that guy's faith brought him to help me and not just drive by, because how many times do we pass by people in distress on the side of the road, right? Next time. That's what I find myself telling myself, or I ain't got time. But I believe that God saved my life through all of those actions and spared my life. And maybe sometimes we feel like we don't have a purpose in our life, or our life is ending because there's no light in it, right? There's no hope, there's no love, any of that. Well, I'm here to tell you that God can change all that for you, and all it takes is accepting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. So if you don't know him, if you have not had that relationship, if you are in that darkness, that place of despair, and you feel like you have no hope, I'm here to tell you that Jesus is the hope. And I want to invite you right now to raise your hand if you don't know him and you do want to know him, so that we could pray for you and that you can accept him in your life and that he can save you. Is there anybody here who wants to do that today? No? All right. Well, then I'm going to give it up to Simon, but I do want to say, even if you're afraid to raise your hand, it doesn't mean that you have to come up here and do that with me. That's a thing between you and the Lord. And there doesn't need to be a church full of people. We just like to celebrate with whoever that is that makes that decision. All right, well, thank you guys, and here's Simon.